We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. Oh, hello and welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle, and our guest today is Jen Ginty. And very interesting story. I'm really excited for her to share. And I'll just tell you briefly about her. She's the founder of My Moody Monster, so we'll hear about that. I'm excited to hear about that, and I really love this idea. She's also a mental health advocate, and she's going to share with us her trauma story, and she's going to share however much she's comfortable with, and also, most importantly, her healing journey. And then there's something else that I talked about before we started the recording that I really find interesting that I haven't heard someone else talk about, and that's the subsequent trauma that happens once you're out of danger. Because a lot of times we think that once we're out of the trauma situation that we're good, and that's not always true. So we're going to get into that. So Jen, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Lisa. I'm so excited for our conversation.
I am too. So why don't you start telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I lived with my family and my abuser for 14 years, and I have two older brothers. And one day, one of my older brothers told a trusted adult what was happening in our family, that our abuser was taking advantage of us, abusing us in all different sorts of ways. And at that point, the abuser was taken from my home, and it was my father, but I call him my abuser. And when we talk about this subsequent trauma, I think a lot of people don't understand what happens after an abuser is taken from a home.
Mm-hmm.
You think that the trauma is gone because the abuser is gone, but there's a lot of other things that happen afterwards. And for me, it was going into the court system. They wanted to they wanted to put my abuser in prison, but they it felt like they didn't really want our help in that. They didn't want to really understand what had happened in our family. And so we were kind of treated like, pains in the ass, really.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to build their case, and there were times where they would ask us to not press charges in certain circumstances of abuse. And it was extremely difficult for us to be going through talking with guardian ad litems and talking with the DA and feeling like we weren't heard. And my brothers, they were older than me, so they were able to talk about the abuse that happened for us. But I was 14. I didn't really have the words for it, and I was really scared.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I took a while to really discuss with anyone what had happened to me. And when I told my story, the DA didn't believe me. They thought I just wanted to add on this. I wanted to be a part of this in some way. And what child wants to be a part of, you know, a court case against their
Yeah.
abuser?
Yeah.
So she put me in front of a court, and I had to tell my sexual abuse history in front of a bunch of
God.
strangers. So that in itself was so difficult. And I started to just kind of dissociate from all of it.
Mm-hmm.
During this time, I actually was able to get myself going into college. And, I started to say not yet to all of the trauma, all of the healing that I had to do from this. But after 4 years of being in this court system and my abuser only getting 4 years himself in prison, and he came back out and he actually abused many other
Mm-hmm.
children after
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yep.
I just didn't want to be involved in it at all anymore. I just wanted to live my life and to push away anything that was going to get in my way. And that included the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, as you know, you can't run from that.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to
Yeah.
say, not yet, all the time. Not yet, I'm going to college. Not yet, I'm starting a career. And then finally, not yet, I'm a mom. How could I take time away from these precious little beings that I created
Yeah.
to look at my own life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I kept pushing along and pushing along. And, one day my brain said, that's it, right now. This is when you need to start this journey.
That's what
And
happens.
all of the physical things happened, the mental things happened. Felt like I was in, a fog, a brain fog, and
Mm-hmm.
my body, I always felt tired. My
Mm-hmm.
brain literally cut me off and said, nope, you're doing this.
Yeah.
You're going to start this journey, and it's going to be hard and it's going to be complicated, but you have to do this now, not just for yourself, but for the people that you love.
It's a crossing point, right? You were at a crossing point, and I totally get that, where your body says and your mind says you're gonna either deal with this or we're gonna end up going in a different direction. I know that was true for myself, and it could have been, anything to continue to not address what had happened to you and the trauma that's happened. And, the other thing that kind of came to mind, I used to work in the legal system, so I know how it works. And the most difficult part is they have to be so sterile. The court system has to be so sterile, and they're just looking at the facts, and they're not looking at the emotion. They're not looking at how it's affected you. And the fact that at 14 years old, you had to, in front of adults, go into detail about what happened to you, when us as adults have a hard time doing that, that alone is just re-traumatizing the whole situation for you. And I'm sorry for that.
Oh, well, thank you. It was definitely traumatic, and
Mm-hmm.
it kept bringing up memories and things that I didn't want
Yeah.
to think about. And it seemed to be constant. Every time I felt like I had told my story, I had to tell it again to
Yeah.
someone
And you're
else.
reliving
And
it.
then right.
You're
And to
reliving
a
it.
grand jury, you know, uh,
Oof. I
putting
mean,
me in front of all those adults.
that's the difference between a memory and trauma. Is a memory you just remembering. The trauma, like what you're explaining, you're actually reliving it. So you're going through the whole physical, emotional, mental part of it.
And that's where the complex PTSD comes in,
Mm-hmm.
when someone is living in trauma consistently
Mm-hmm.
and for a long time. It changes your body chemistry, it changes the neurons in your brain, so
Mm-hmm.
that you become hyper aware, hyper focused. You're hyper,
Yeah.
literally hyper.
Yeah.
Your
It's
stress
true.
levels, yeah, your stress levels are so much higher than other people's, like, quote, normal people.
Right.
And so you're living in this constant feeling of what's going to happen next.
Yes.
What's around the corner?
Yep.
What do I need to be afraid of now?
When's the rug going to get pulled out from under me? Yeah.
Right.
I got into the habit, and I think it's built into me, but as a child, I used to, before I would walk into the house, I would open the door and assess how the house felt. Who's home, what kind of mood they're in, what's going on. Before I would take a step into the house, I just remember opening the door and just listening and waiting, so I would
Yeah.
be able to prepare myself.
Mhm. Yeah. It's a constant need to protect yourself as much as you possibly can when you're a child and your abuser is a full-blown adult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I've been watching um, Gabor Mate. He's on Theo Vaughn's podcast I think it was this past weekend. That's the name of the podcast. And he's talking so much about this trauma and how it affects us. And, as children, the reason why they disassociate is because as adults, like I said, we can't wrap our head around this, but as a child, they are having the feeling they know something's not right, and there's a feeling or emotion in them of wanting to flee or fight back or do something, but they know that they can't. And so the only way that they can function in that moment is to disassociate.
Yeah. Yeah, it becomes it's your number one coping tool in that sense.
I didn't think I had that. And then I started researching it more and I was like, oh yeah, there, and I can remember times of me disassociating because every time I read it before, oh, I didn't do that. I didn't do that. And then I looked into it more. And now that I understand why it happens, I'm sure that it's more common than we realize. And it's just, when it happens to us at such a young age, it just becomes a part of us and it becomes our normal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little about your healing journey. So
Yeah.
14, you had to go to court. Your
Yep.
abuser got 4 years in prison.
Yep, that's it. And I kept pushing until I think I was in my early 40s is when my
Which is
brain
common.
finally broke. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and it was that I knew at that point that I had to take care of myself. My
Yeah.
children were still young, so I was very fearful. But, I there was no way that I was going to be able to move forward. So I did what I had learned when I was, my mother had me go into therapy, and she actually required it for when I went to college, kind of like, I will continue to help you as long as you stay in therapy, that kind of thing. So I knew the things that I needed to do for myself. I needed to create a group of people that could help me. And number one was a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am in my like mid 40s, and I'm looking for a therapist that's going to help me through this. And a social worker friend of mine recommended my current psychologist, and was at least 15 to 20 years younger than me. And at first I was like, "Really? She's so young. Do you really think that she's going to be able to help me? She doesn't have that, background. She doesn't understand an old woman like me." you know? But I opened my mind and I went in, and she's just been amazing. And the reason why to not discount younger professionals at this point is they learn so many more modalities of
True.
therapy, the ones that have been studied that maybe the older therapists haven't learned because they weren't being educated about it, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
they're
So
not
she had
staying up
all
on top of
these,
it. Mm-hmm.
right. So she
Mm-hmm.
had all these different modalities specifically for PTSD.
Mm.
And so she introduced me to internal family systems and EMDR. And so I started my journey with her. And I also knew that I needed some group help as well.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was younger, I used to hate group therapy. But when I became older, it was these are peers that
Yeah.
understand the same things. They've gone through similar, if not the same things.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's more important to have that camaraderie around you.
Yeah. The support.
And
Mm-hmm.
right,
And people
right.
that can
So,
understand you, right? Finally, someone that can kind of understand you that you can connect with.
yes. Yeah, and I did actually go into inpatient at one point. I knew I needed my meds to be readjusted. I hadn't
Mm-hmm.
had them. My PCP didn't know what he was doing. He was just giving me whatever,
Yeah.
he thought was right. And so I went, I'm lucky to be living closest to one of the best mental health facilities in the country. It's called McLean Hospital. And so I went to McLean and got my meds changed up and better for me. And so I had that in under my, belt at that point. And they also introduced me to a therapy that has been so incredibly helpful for me. It's called DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy.
I haven't heard of
And
that.
it was, yeah, it was created by a woman named Marsha Linehan. And it's specifically for people with PTSD and also for borderline personality disorder because they
Mm.
have very similar, you know, um, the same kind of,
Behaviors
from
or
it's
traits.
very, yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
behaviors and the familiarity of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned all about emotions through
Mm.
this. DBT, that's what it is created for, to learn about your emotions, understand them, and create a toolbox of coping skills for them. And I was in this group therapy session and I was talking about how frustrated I was with my PTSD symptoms. And I said, I wish I had a monster that I could just rip apart, throw across the room, bang against the walls. And people in the group were like, yeah, you should have that. And, I went home and I'm not a seamstress, I'm not a tailor. And I put together this ragtag plush monster and made the arms and legs out of Velcro so that I could rip them apart.
I'm liking that idea because another thing that was said on Theo Vaughn's podcast was that, he talked about how it just feels like we're at a place right now where we want to just yell. We want to just go outside and just yell at the top of our lungs, right? And Gabor, he said, it's usually the people who are really sensitive that feel that way. And there's a lot, and we do need to recognize that there are people in this world that are more sensitive than others. And they are usually the ones that are the most frustrated, that have that pent up, that need something like this.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I called them PTSD Pete for my own, for my,
Oh, that's cute.
because he was mine. Yeah. And, as I was using Pete, he was really helping me out. And I thought, this could probably help others,
Mm-hmm.
and especially children, because children don't
Yes.
know how to talk about emotions. They don't understand them. I called my boys when they were really little, I called them my little cavemen because they didn't have the experience. They, came into this with just their feelings and, their emotions and their
Yeah.
body feelings, that kind of thing. They don't come in with an understanding of these things.
Right. That's our job, to teach them how to understand them and manage them and regulate them.
Right. And,
Instead, for years, it was be quiet, stop, don't act like that, stop it. And now we
right,
need to help them learn how to express these emotions and feelings in a healthy way.
right. Exactly. And like you said, we were taught not to show our emotions,
Right.
not to make people uncomfortable with our emotions. Don't be an angry girl. Don't make grandma upset about your sadness.
Yeah.
Those kind of things.
Yep.
So we weren't taught them. And that's where the communication tool comes in with Moody. The Moody allows children to let out those frustrations, and it also allows the caregivers, the parents, grandparents, whoever they're with, to understand that these children need support in that time.
Mm-hmm.
So Moody became, this great tool for a child to rip it apart and get all of these feelings out, get those frustrations out. But the best part about Moody is putting them back together again,
Mm.
because you can talk about what happened. What can we do next time to better help you cope with this? And giving them validation that it's okay for them to feel those feelings and they let it out in a safe way.
Yeah, I like that. Are these for adults too?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Because I'm
Well,
thinking of
Pete,
buying one for me.
oh, yeah. I have a lawyer, trademark lawyer, that she absolutely loves Moody, and she has one, and she says, "I use it on all of my meetings." She's like, she
Especially.
has it
Oh, yeah.
underneath. So, yeah,
Seriously.
I always say they're like 0 to 99 or 100 for the years.
Oh my goodness. I'm definitely gonna have to get myself one. So tell us how this is like. You tried this out on your boys, and what did they say? Like what
Oh, they
was,
use
because I'm really curious to hear what the child's view of this is.
Yes, so I did a lot of testing, and gave out a bunch of Moody's to different families and also to therapists and teachers, and got a lot of great feedback. And it's definitely been helpful for children, especially with autism, because
Ah,
of their Moody's texture, Moody's sound when they're ripping apart. I spent a long time with the prototype getting the perfect Velcro, so it could be so sticky that it'd be so hard to rip apart, and the sound of it is so
yeah.
satisfying.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the tactile along with the audio, it's been really helpful for kids with autism.
So tell me how it helped you. Talk
Oh,
about like when you made your Pete. Pete is his name,
Pete,
right?
yes.
Pete.
Yep.
how did that feel? Like I'm imagining what it would feel like for me, but tell us how, when you created this and you for the first time used it,
Mm.
what happened?
It was, I wouldn't say magical, but it was so satisfying.
Mm,
And again, it was that he was there when I needed them. That doesn't happen so much for adults, especially. So I'm a single mom, and
yeah.
I don't have a partner, so I don't really have didn't really have someone to be there to talk to about these things.
Hmm.
So Pete, now Moody, became that, the way to communicate to myself. Moody became a love language for me for my healing. It
I,
was it Yep.
oh, I was just going to say, I would imagine that as you're dealing with Moody, that things would come up that probably wouldn't normally come up. Like I'm just imagining being able to talk to this doll and telling him how you really feel, because that's part of the problem, is that we shut our voice down, right? That's one of the biggest problems that us survivors have, is that our voice gets shut down. And so I'm trying to, I'm imagining this for myself, and I'm trying to help the audience understand how helpful this would be, because you're getting out, because I say thoughts lose their power when you say them out loud. And we have so many thoughts in our head. I'm an overthinker, and I can ruminate forever. And so being able to get this stuff out of using your voice and getting those emotions, allowing those emotions to come up, because that's what's important, is getting those emotions to come up and out of your body and expressing them in a safe way. Like, I think this is
And not
brilliant.
running from them. Yeah,
Right.
not running from them is so important.
Or suppressing them.
And that's what we do. That's what
Mm-hmm.
survivors do
Mm-hmm.
because, it's a survival tool.
Mm-hmm.
It's the coping skill that we learned, and it doesn't really help us out very much
No.
because you keep pushing it down, you're going to blow.
And there's a statistic, and you actually fit right in it, unfortunately. I had one guest on who mentioned that women who are sexually abused are usually between the ages of 13 and 17, and it takes them 4 decades before they even talk about it. And you're like, the statistic. And I see that so often, not just in sexual abuse, but in abuse, period, where voices, you don't express it, the shame that, shuts down our voice. And that is why I have this podcast, is to get this information out there so that people don't suffer for 40 years. Don't
Yeah. And you're
suffer for
right,
40.
toxic shame is like a main staple of
Mm-hmm.
surviving sexual abuse, I believe, because you're ashamed of your body and what was done to it. You're ashamed of how
Everything.
you feel about yourself. Right.
It's a
And,
really lonely
that's
place.
it is. And toxic shame, again, it's toxic. It's telling us that we're a bad person.
Right.
And that's just not true. And that's one of the things that I like about Moody as well. My oldest son, he had a lot of behavioral issues when he was young, and he had many, many physical outbursts. And at the end of it, he would go into a shame spiral.
Yeah.
And those shame spirals are so hard to watch. And if they have too many, it does start to turn into toxic shame. It's not what
Sure.
they did was unacceptable, it's that they're a bad person.
Right.
And that is what they can carry for years and years and years and not even realize they're carrying it.
I had Tim Fletcher on my podcast. He was amazing. He's a complex trauma expert. And I asked him about shame, because in my opinion, for me, there's nothing good about shame. Same with jealousy. Like, those are two very destructive emotions that, as a matter of fact, Gabor Mate says that children aren't born with shame. We're not born with shame. It's developed. But I asked him, I said, this doesn't make any sense to me, but why is it those of us who have been abused carry the shame, not the abuser? The abuser doesn't carry the shame. We end up carrying the shame, and it's detrimental to our health. And he said, shame is a belief system. It is what you believe about yourself. And I paused for a minute, and I quickly scan my life, and I recognize that he's right, because I don't carry shame at all like I used to. Shame will pop up here and there. And when it does, I'm able to go, okay, why did that pop up, and kind of analyze why that showed up. But I used to live in shame. I was a completely ashamed of myself. And I don't anymore. And that is because I have worked on changing the beliefs I had about myself, because the beliefs I had about myself came directly from my childhood abuse and came from my abuser. And I believed all that stuff, and I carried that into my adult life. So that is encouraging to know that we don't have to live with that shame,
No, we don't.
that we can
And
work
we
through
can,
it and
and
change our beliefs.
that's exactly right. You said it correctly. We can work through that shame and come out of it on the other side.
So, so tell us where you're at today with Moody.
Yes. So I actually ran out of my first batch of Moody's. I sold out.
Darn.
And yeah, I just received funding for my next big batch of Moody's.
Are you going to go on Shark
So,
Tank?
oh, so many people have told me that. And
Seriously.
I feel like that you always have to have a certain amount of like financials there, and I'm not there yet. So I'm like working on it. I'm really excited. Like I said, Moody's a love language for me.
Yeah.
I created while I was waiting for them to create the prototype and then get me the dolls. I knew I needed to do something to help people while I was
Yeah.
waiting. So I created these talks and I called them Moody Talks, kind of like TED Talks.
Mm.
And I used the DBT skills that I learned and created an emotion each month. I'd pick an emotion. And the first week, I would talk about what are the words that we use for this emotion and how do we feel they are
Mm.
intense to us? What's the intensity level of them? Because I truly believe that we need to understand our own vocabulary of our
Correct.
feelings.
Yep.
And when we know the intensity of the vocabulary, we can help ourselves better.
That's true. Knowledge is
So,
so powerful in our healing. It's so
it,
important. And defining what these things mean to us
mhm.
is so important.
Yeah. And understanding how it feels in our body and how we
Yeah.
react to that emotion is so important as well. So I do that the first week. And then the next 3 weeks, I choose a coping skill that goes along with it. And I talk about that coping skill and teach it so that, maybe this can help other people. And I believe that DBT can help people who don't have PTSD because we all have emotions and they're all
Correct.
valid.
Right.
And we all need a toolbox for our coping skills so that we
Correct.
have them available when we need them.
Mm-hmm. Right. And again, because even if someone hasn't necessarily gone through trauma or abuse like we have, there's still things that happen in their life, and still beliefs, and still, it's because I think, especially in my generation, it was definitely be seen and not heard. Right. And so, especially for men really have had their voices shut down, and they are limited in what they're allowed to share or express. And for men, it's usually anger, because they're not allowed to cry. They're not allowed to be vulnerable. They're not allowed to have all those other emotions. And I had one counselor say to me, and, it stopped me in my tracks, but it's so true. Men have the same emotions that women do.
Hmm. They
They're
do.
just not allowed to express them.
Right. And that's where a really good coping skill that I use comes in really great for this because we all have our primary emotions. We feel them in the situation. But if you're someone who's been in trauma, and this also is for probably most men that are out there, they jump to a secondary emotion because it feels more in control and it feels
Mm,
safer.
ah,
So for me,
yes.
if I feel fear, my brain immediately jumps to anger
Me
because
too.
anger feels, yeah, it feels more comfortable. It feels safer and it feels
Mm-hmm.
like more in control, right? And I think
Yeah.
that happens a lot for men. They feel their feelings, but they were taught you don't get to feel that. So
Yeah.
it immediately jumps to anger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The
And that's
only
where
way they're
toxic
allowed to
masculinity comes
express
in.
it.
Right. Right. And it's the toxic masculinity that builds in that.
And for us women, we do need to get more comfortable in allowing men to have those emotions and to express those emotions and to raise our sons to be able to express it. And it's okay if they cry. I have a 2.5-year-old grandson. I was visiting just last week with my new granddaughter, and he's at that age where he gets mad and he's starting to have some tantrums, which is very normal for that age. And the other grandma and I both are really careful with our words. And one of the things, we don't tell him not to cry, but we tell him no tantrum, we tell him, you can't have a tantrum. And we explain that to him as much as he can understand. But the one thing we don't want to do is shut down those emotions and, help him to regulate that, teach him how to manage that. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be upset. It's what you do in that situation that can turn the tables. And so it was really
Yes.
interesting because both her and I were like, yeah, we're not going to tell him, don't cry. Is no tantrum. You can't have a tantrum. And so it's interesting, and it's kind of rewording and re-evaluating how we interact with each other, whether we're a man or a woman, because we have the same emotions, we have the same feelings. Women are going to probably share them more comfortably, but we need to give men the safe space.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And I raised my sons, and I hope that they feel that I raised them in a way where they can tell me anything and that I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to judge them.
Right, right, right. I know that's the way I've been with my son. He's now, what, 34? Yeah, he's 34. And it's the same thing. I've told him, you can talk to me about anything. Nothing is off the table. And, even at the age of 34 years old, and he'll still talk with me about stuff. And you know, I was not a perfect mother. I realized that he was raised in a home where the mom was in survival mode. So that was a whole
Exactly.
situation for him. But I was really very aware of letting him express himself freely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope that others have learned over the years. Hopefully, our generation, has learned that we need to allow our boys, our children in general, to have those feelings and be able to talk about them with us. And
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
that's where I think Moody has helped with a lot of families. I've heard a lot of great stories of how parents have been able to put the oxygen mask on themselves and figure
Hmm.
out their feelings because we're all triggered by our children,
Oh yeah.
especially when they're being destructive or
Yeah.
they're out of control. So I always tell parents, put the oxygen mask on first because you can't attack your child in the way that they're already feeling attacked. Like you have to figure out your feelings and then you'll be able to better help them. And I also tell parents, you can always apologize to your children.
Yes.
There's no shame in apologizing to your
Yep.
child, realizing that what was said or done was not the best way to handle it because our emotions get out of control too. Parents aren't perfect, right?
There's an interesting story, and I've shared this on my podcast before. I remember as a child thinking that, oh, and I don't know why I thought this, but when you become an adult, you got it together. That you don't make mistakes, that you're perfect. It's so strange that I thought that, right? And I was aware of that when my son was probably about 7 or 8. And I remember I was in the car, my dad was riding with us, and my son was there. And I don't know, we were talking, I don't remember what we were talking about, but there was something in that conversation that made me realize that my son thought the same thing. And I just wanted to make sure he understood that, I'm an adult, but I make mistakes. And so I told him, I said, honey, I mom makes mistakes. And I remember seeing his face, looking in the rearview mirror and seeing his face. And he's like, really? Really, mom? And my dad piped in. He goes, yeah, grandpa, he makes mistakes too. And just that realization. And I don't know, again, I don't know why I thought that. And I don't know why my son thought that, but that's probably, I would imagine, something that's common, that's why it's so important that when we do make those mistakes with our children, that we do go to them and say, look, you know what, mom was stressed. Mom said some things that she shouldn't have. I'm really sorry, and just owning it, that can take your relationship with that child in such a wonderful direction. They can trust you. Because imagine, I remember when I would see my mom act out and she called me a bitch one time because she couldn't find the scissors. She like slammed the door after she asked me where the scissors were and called me a bitch. And I'm like, just because I couldn't find the scissors for her. And so imagine if I go into this thinking that adults are perfect, they don't make mistakes. And my mom just did that. And then she doesn't come back and say, Mom's really sorry for saying that to you. Imagine how confusing that is.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
We need to have that dialogue with our kids, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when do you think you're going to have more Moody's out? Because I'm seriously going to buy
Well,
one.
I just ordered. Yeah, no, I just ordered them. It's going to take a few months, and I'm thinking January is most likely when
Okay.
they're going to be coming in. Yeah,
All right.
yeah. But what I have out on my website, I have a pre-order, so you can pre-order, and it'll be sent out as soon as I get them. And I also
Tell
have a
us your website.
donation.
Tell us your
Sure,
website
it's
first.
www.mymoodymonster.com, all one word. And yeah, and so I have the pre-order to get your own, and then I have a donation pre-order because one of my social missions for this is to get the dolls out to children in trauma.
Yes.
So first responders, social workers, medical facilities,
Yeah.
where children are going to be and they need something to hold on to and something to take care of in that moment so that they aren't stuck in that trauma.
Yeah.
So
Get some kind of
I
release.
really think it's important. Yeah, I think it's really important, especially kids who are going into foster care. They
Yeah.
get a trash bag and
Yeah.
they have to throw their stuff in a trash bag, and I want them to have a buddy to help them through
Mm-hmm.
that time.
Yeah. There's a place called the Polinsky Center here in San Diego that takes the kids when they're taken out of homes and before they put them in foster care. It's the kind of in between place. And I would love to be able to donate something like that to a place like
Yeah,
that because those kids are just I can't imagine how terrifying that is for them to live in the homes that they lived in, and then even though it's really bad, it's their normal, and then they get yanked out of that, and then they have no idea what's going to happen
right.
next, and there's not the support system for them.
No, there isn't. And I'd love to get the name of that place because I'm trying to find the places that are doing that so that I can get the Moody's to them.
Well, let's collaborate, let's work on this together because I think this is a great thing for anybody, but especially for children who are, like you say, they're in that crisis mode and they need something um, that is going to help them for the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And, have a buddy that they can rip apart when they're upset
Mm-hmm.
and
And put
know
back
that it's
together.
a right. And Moody comes with a coloring book, and one of the pages is, "It doesn't hurt me. Don't worry, it doesn't
Oh,
hurt me." That's what they're made for. So
oh,
Moody, yeah, is that monster for them.
I love that because and it's like you can tell the kids you can hurt like you can attack this and you're not going to hurt that, but explaining to them, but if you do that to somebody else, you can hurt them. But you give them an out, you give them a place to express themselves in a safe way. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's definitely stay in touch and work on this because I think it's a great thing that you're doing, and it's certainly making a difference. And I'm going to have my own Moody. I'm going to get my own.
Yeah. I'm just so happy to be able to put out, like I said, my love language to the world.
Yeah. So if the audience wanted to reach out to you, I know you gave your website. Is there any other way that people can reach out to you in case they want to find out more about you or Moody?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on YouTube. My channel has those Moody Talks, and I also do Moody Storytime, where we read books about big feelings. And I'm on all the socials basically as My Moody Monster, all one word. And you can also reach out to me just by, Jen at mymoodymonster.com.
Excellent. Well, Jen, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for inventing the Moody Monster. I love that. I'm telling you, I know it's going to make a difference, and I hope you get more funding and keep this thing going because I really believe it's going to make a difference. And so, thank you for being here and sharing your story as well.
Thank you So this was